There we go. Our presenter today is Swati Chavda on the science of branding. She is a former neurosurgeon who has gone on to become an author, and I believe she won an Aurora Award last night. Right? Yeah. There's a tongue twister for you.
Yes, I did. Thank
for
you.
one of your poems. I don't know if you found out the next morning because you might not have been awake when it was on. But I remember seeing a picture on Facebook. I think it was Susie Vadori had laid out her books, which have a red cover as sort of a red carpet.
Yeah. Yeah.
So people are being very creative on these Zoom meetings. So it's been quite enlightening and quite entertaining. So I now give you Swati. You want to share your screen?
Hi, hello everyone. Before I start, I must tell you about one disaster which has just happened. And the disaster was, just before this, I was on a panel called To Hell and Back. And while I was fiddling around with something, I managed to delete my PowerPoint presentation. So I'm going to present without any slides, and you'll just have to see my face, sadly. But that's fine. I have my notes, so I will be able to present the thing, except that we won't have slides this time. I think in a way it's a good thing which happened because, it's the last day of the conference and I'm sure everyone is tired and saturated with information. So having it more informally might actually work out the best right now. And we might be able to pause more often for questions. So let's begin. So today the topics we'll be discussing are firstly, what is branding and what is not branding? Because that is as important as what branding is. Secondly, how is branding different from marketing? Are there different ways to approach these two things? And thirdly, the meat of the presentation will be about the neuroscience of branding, because if we understand that, we can understand brand loyalty and we can harness that to create our own brand in such a way that readers can identify with a brand and engage with it and become long-term followers. And in the end, we'll have a little talk about how branding pertains to authors. So let's start with what a brand is. A brand is the why that underlies anything, any product or service which we provide. It is our own stamp of uniqueness that makes every encounter enticing, engaging, and memorable. And like someone mentioned, it started with cattle, right? Like people used to brand their cattle with heated iron rods, and that is the way the cattle used to be identified, which farmer it belonged to. In a similar way, when we display our brand to the world, whether it's on our website, newsletter, social media, or even in in-person interactions, the reader should be able to identify that, yes, this is this person's brand, this is this person's product. And of course, the product itself is a part of branding. Everything has to be cohesive. While it is possible to create and implement branding strategies, that is something we have control over, but the brand itself is intangible. And what we think our brand is and the way our reader perceives our brand is might be different. So we have to actually make sure that we bridge that gap so that there's compatibility. The readers view our brand the way we want them to view it. Now, simply putting our work out there is not branding. Many people, they do a lot of things. They put themselves out there and do stuff, and they feel that they are participating in brand building activities. But that is not so. It has to be an intentional effort towards creating a cohesive brand. Now, if whatever marketing efforts we put in, if we have not understood our brand, then we end up using our precious resources, whether it's our energy, our mental efforts, time, or even money we spend. They will not yield adequate results if we have not branded ourselves properly, because without the brand, everything will be scattered and the readers might forget us. This is the reason why authors often feel frustrated. You hear this quite often, that people say, oh, I've been trying so hard to gain traction, but nothing seems to work. It's like I'm speaking in a vacuum. And one of the reasons for that is because the marketing efforts have not been fine-tuned through the use of effective branding. If the marketing strategies stem from our own brand, then we can communicate it properly to our target readers. Now, one question which people often ask is, how is branding different from marketing, or is it different at all? Just a sec. Somebody has asked whether we can have the PowerPoint presentation loaded at a later date. Yes, most certainly. Because I'm sure, I mean, I have the notes already, so I just have to put them on the PowerPoint, and I will share it with you all on the When Words Collide website as a PDF. So yeah, because there's a lot of information here and it will be difficult to remember it all. So yes, so branding and marketing are not exactly the same thing. Branding is a subset of marketing. Marketing involves a lot of things other than branding. It has many steps which come even before branding, such as we have to do market research. We have to know who our consumer is, what are the consumer preferences. Then there are a lot of other marketing activities like lead generation, promotional activities, advertising. We have to understand sales funnels. But we will not be talking about any of those today. We are just going to focus on the branding aspect of marketing. Marketing is a way for us to know who our potential reader is, and we do it through marketing research, and then how to find them. But branding is, once we know who our potential reader is, how we appear to them, the message we convey to them through every possible interface. That is what constitutes branding. It has to be a clear and effective message. And if you have good branding, it can create brand loyalty in the target reader. And because of that, that's why, when you hear, if you have favorite authors, every time that their book comes out, you just go and buy it without even thinking about it. Because there is brand loyalty existing already, and that person or the publisher has worked to create that brand loyalty over years. We will talk about some of the factors which can help us create that as well. So your brand is what you are, but it's not just that. How others perceive what you are is also important. And so if we there's a question, can you give a few examples of brand? Well, Nike is one. They have a very clear brand message. When I put up the slides, I will also include examples of some good author brands. I don't have it in my notes here, and it's just a visual thing, but you will see it in the PDF which I share with you. But talking of other brands, I feel Nike is a very good brand. They have a very, when you see Nike, it creates a very specific idea, just do it. And they have that logo also, which is very sharp and energizing. And for people who are looking for that kind of experience, it appeals to them. So when how you present your brand, it can be done in multiple interfaces. One is your vision statement. If you create your vision statement, basically, when you have a product, if you have written a book, basically, you have to know why you have written it. If you know that reason, then it's easier for you to know what kind of emotion you want to create in your readers. And once you know that emotion, it's easy for you to create that kind of feeling. You can build your experience around that. So one of the ways you can start building your brand is by asking yourself the question, why have I written this book? And what do I want my reader to feel? So we can actually create brand assets. So things like, when people talk about brand assets, you talk about things like logos or graphics, or even the colors which you use on websites. When somebody comes across your website, it depends on the kind of fonts you have used, the kind of colors you have used, even the pictures you have put up. Are they compatible with the genre you're writing in? if because as I had mentioned in the blurb, the description of this thing, a person just has to look at something for 13 milliseconds, and that is enough for them to make an assessment whether they want to continue engaging with it or not. Just 13 milliseconds. So they don't even have time to read what you have written. They just look at it, and the kind of feel it gives to them, that is, they make a split-second decision within that time. So as soon as they look at your website or even the cover of your book or anything, any way you're presenting your product, does it instantly tell them what kind of book it is, how it's going to make them feel? If it's a romance book, if it's a fantasy, science fiction, or thriller, each of these genres have their own underlying core emotion, and whether it's your cover or your website, it should instantly convey that kind of emotion. Your brand is a living, breathing thing, and it is a DNA which constitutes your product as well as marketing effort. And basically, your product as well as your marketing efforts share this DNA, so it has to feel coherent. Sometimes what you see is that a book will have one kind of a look and feel to it, and the website will have a different look and feel to it, but it has to be cohesive. It has to feel as if it's tied together. Many times people wonder that why, sometimes they know that their product is engaging, they know it's quite interesting, but people are still not paying attention to it. And the reason for that is that capturing attention, it requires a different skill set compared to creating engagement. And that's why, many of us can write awesome books for 100,000 words or even longer, but we find it hard to write a 200-word book description because both of them require different skill sets. The entire book requires using between hook as well as creating engagement, whereas the description is purely about capturing attention, and it's very hard for people to do. So when we talk about the neurobiological underpinning of creating a memorable brand, there are a few things we talk about. One is attention, one is engagement, and third is addiction or loyalty. And if we understand how attention is captured, and how engagement is created, it's easier to move on towards loyalty. When we talk about attention, do people have any questions so far before I move on to the actual neurobiological things?
One gentleman was talking about since a writer's name appears on the cover of his or her books, is there any purpose in developing a logo?
No, not for fiction authors, but for people who write nonfiction, or there are many authors who are also editors or even provide graphic design services. For them, it helps to have a logo. Even if you don't have a logo, it's good to have a cohesive brand look, like a visual feel. It has you should know your brand colors. Like there are primary colors, secondary colors for your brand. There are accent colors. So there are various things, what kind of fonts you want to use. So for fiction authors, it's very difficult you don't really need a logo and that kind of stuff. It's more for nonfiction or even for other allied writing related services. Now there's a question, as writers produce different kinds of work, different titles, etc., how do we build cohesion? That's a great question. In fact, it's a question I also grapple with because I write different types of books. I write nonfiction, I write poetry, and I write fiction. And even within fiction, I write epic fantasy and humor. So how does one build a cohesive brand around it? We will be talking about that towards the end of the presentation. Once we've gone through the neurobiological things, because that will help us understand the actual practical aspects better. So I'll go on to attention. Now, when we talk about attention, we often use the word paying attention. And there is the obvious word payment implied there. That implies there's a cost there. And it is true, every time we pay attention, we are using precious resources from our brain. And it is not possible to pay attention for a long time to too many things. It does get used up. Attention is finite. So paying attention or capturing someone's attention is not an easy task. As Oxford Dictionary, it defines attention as taking notice of someone or something, or then regarding someone or something as important. How does attention happens? Psychologists say that attention is when you concentrate your awareness on some phenomenon to the exclusion of other stimuli. Now, we often multitask because life is so busy and we just don't have time to do too many things. So many times stimuli compete with each other. And when we pay attention to something, it is our mind which considers that, oh, this is important, this might be interesting, and then it latches on to that. So a mind decides whether a given stimulus is going to be worth it to pay further attention to. There are 4 different types of attention. One is selective attention, where you're focusing on a book, focusing on something exclusively. Like if you really read an interesting book and you're really into it, that is when you're paying selective attention. Then there is divided attention. That is when you are focusing on 2 tasks at the same time. It can be alternating tasks, or you might be doing simultaneous work. So multitasking is that kind of stuff. And that divided attention does have a heavy cost on our mental energy. Then there is sustained attention, where our attention is focused for a long period of time. And then there is an attention where it is a focused attention, which requires, executive attention, where we have to do stepwise thing. Like if you're filling a form for something, that is an executive attention. Now our job is, like, at a given time, a reader who is scanning through things, they will be they'll have this divided attention. Most often they'll either be going through social media and they come across your blog post or website, or they might be going through their email and they come across your newsletter. Usually people come across our product when they are already doing something else. So people are in a state of divided attention, and our goal is to convert that divided attention into sustained attention, because only then we'll be able to create further engagement. Now, attention itself, when we say paying attention, it just sounds like a single thing, but attention itself has 3 components. One is arousal, then there is orientation, and the third is decision making. And we will talk about how we can use each of these components effectively into creating our brand. Decision making is basically the action when the reader decides whether to further engage with us, our work, or not. So effective attention, attention is important for us in normal life, because otherwise there are stimuli coming to us from all directions, and we just would feel overwhelmed. So we have to filter things out. We have to decide which thing to pay attention to. Because of that, basically attention is a very precious resource, and when somebody pays attention to us, we should make sure that our message is clear, relevant, and it stands out in some way, and that is what makes it memorable. Now, there are various factors which affect attention, and knowing that will help us use the factors which help with good attention and avoid the factors which prevent attention. So these factors are external factors which are dependent on the stimulus, like whatever our product is, that is the external factor. And then there is recipient dependent factors. So basically the person who's viewing your product, some of it will depend on them as well. So the things which are the stimulus dependent things are under our control. I think all of this might be too much to remember right now, but I will share the PDF with you on the When Worlds Collide, so don't worry about that. So stimulus is basically whatever we put on to our target market. It can be our website, a newsletter, social media posts, podcast, webinars, or even in-person events. Every interface is a place where the stimulus is given to the person. Let's just talk about website because it just focuses our attention on one particular thing. So intensity is one of the things which affects attention. The more intense the stimulus, the more likely it will be noticed. Then size is another factor. Bigger is better indeed. So knowing this, if you want some important information to be put on your website, keep it big. Don't hide it in a corner. Whatever is the first thing you want them to look at, make it big. Again, colors, a colorful thing is always more attention grabbing than black and white. So whatever again, there are certain colors like red or certain bright yellow, they all grab more attention. Even within colors, the ones which are more saturated, they gain attention more. Sometimes even things like movement, if you have some moving thing happening in your website, that can also capture attention. This can also be a trap because if you have too many moving things, it can take attention away from what you want them to look at. So that's another thing to focus on. If there is a break in any pattern, that thing also catches attention. So we can, this is an interesting factor because when we write in a particular genre, we have to convey the genre expectations to the reader. Otherwise, they will not feel interested in the first place. And yet, we must also stand out in some way from other works within that genre. So this is where knowing the why really helps us because we know why we have written this book. We know what we want our readers to feel. So that way we can customize our message. And it's a very complete thing, like the kind of fonts you use. Obviously, a fantasy website for a fantasy book will use a different sort of font compared to a website for a romance book. And we do it on the covers as well, but this is important for the website so that somebody who lands there can instantly say what it is. Now, what if you write books in different genre? Ideally, it is good to have a different book page for each, even at least for the different type of books, and you can customize each page to the genre and the feel you want to create around it. The entire website, like the home page, if you have multiple things going on, I think it should be your general personality from which it stems. And also knowing who your target readers are. If you think your target readers are going to be women, or if you think your target readers are men or children, or even within a specific, even if it's not specific gender, it may be, people who like to read certain books with certain type of tone. So all of that can help us create a more cohesive thing, even if we work in a diverse way. One important thing is, among other intensity, etc., which we mentioned, contrast is another factor. If our color is something which is more monochromatic does not stand out. So if you have a website where everything is, there are things which are kind of monochromatic and there is one thing which you want someone to notice, then keep that in a contrasting color. That will really stand out. One very important thing is anything which is emotion laden always grabs attention. When we talk about emotions, there are two dimensions which are important. So one is called valence and the other is arousal. So valence is basically positive or negative. So emotions which are positive or negative. And then there are some emotions which are kind of neutral. Similarly for arousal, there are high arousal emotions or there are low arousal emotion. So when we talk about a negative high arousal emotion, it's something like anger or hatred. Those are very strong emotions, so they are high arousal. At the same time, they are negative. And when you in positive emotions, if you want to talk about high arousal, it is things like ecstasy. A sense of wonder is more low arousal positive emotion, but so there are different things. So high arousal always is more useful for grabbing attention, and then if you want to use lower arousal emotions for later on for engagement, that is fine. But the first instance where you want to grab attention, a higher arousal emotion is always better. And I mean, pictures do convey emotion. So the kind of pictures you use, think of what sort of emotion it conveys, what sort of tone it creates. Then another thing about attention is that it is recipient dependent as well. So these factors are unique to each person who views a brand, and therefore they depend on each person. It's not fully under control, but there are things which we can do to help. One is that only if a person is interested in something, they're going to pay attention to it. So market research, this is where market research comes into play. And it helps us determine who our target market is. It helps us figure out what they want. And then we can tailor our message in a way that it is interesting to that particular target market. Secondly, for any act of paying attention, effort is required. And people don't like to put in effort. I mean, we are basically lazy inherently, and especially attention. There are demands on attention from everywhere. So it is not easy we don't want to pay attention. So anything which requires extra work from the viewer, so that's always a bad thing. So even on a website, if you have something which your stuff is spread around all over the place, it does not look haphazard, then it makes it difficult to pay attention. One thing is that if the website is arranged in such a way that there is the train of thought is easy to follow, from one place to another, then the readers are more likely to stay engaged. Now, when we talk about attention, there is something I like to call attention traps. Something where things which will trap our attention and then throw the person out of the whole engagement. And I call them ABCs of attention traps. So ABC is annoying, boring, or confusing. There's no marketing jargon here. This is just plain English. ABCs of attention traps is annoying, boring, or confusing. So if any message or any place where readers come in contact with your product, if that thing is annoying or boring or confusing, they are likely to disengage.
Swati, did you have a question about the website when you haven't published a book yet?
What do you suggest for website when you haven't published a book yet? It depends on how far you are from publishing. One thing is, if you are getting close, then you probably have a cover, you have a book description, and you can start building your website then. Again, if you have a blog, many people have blogs even much before they actually have books. So you can connect the blog to your website and use that blog to drive traffic to your website. Website is a place where you can keep your sign up to capture the people who come. But then, I mean, the whole purpose of having a website is if you have a book to sell or a product to sell, that's when it comes in the most handy. But yeah, I mean, if you have a cover or a book description, you can certainly build it before publishing. Or even if you have not published it, and if you want a book, you can always, if you don't even have a cover yet, you can always create a placeholder cover. Now there are so many good sites for creating graphics very easily, even for people who are not trained. Things like Canva. I think most people must be familiar with it. It's spelled Canva, Canva. it's a free site. You can access it as an app or even through the Chrome or Safari, and it helps and create all sorts of promotional material very easily. So if you have a placeholder cover with some description or even some pictures, many free pictures are available which are actually not copyrighted. You can use that to, as long as you create a coherent message, like all the pictures should convey the kind of emotions you want them to convey, and if they fit within your brand tone, then you can create promotional material even before you publish your book. But yeah, I mean, you have to tie it in with something. Many people just keep saying, buy my stuff, buy my stuff. That gets annoying. That falls into that A of the ABC category. So if you give something to value along with promotional activities, it's always more useful. Now we'll move on from attention to engagement. Engagement is basically when the reader, I'll say consumer because it may be a reader or it may be anyone who's just interacting with your product in some way. They feel a heightened emotional connection with your product, and this connection actually influences them to put in more effort towards your product because they feel it activates this reward cycle. Engagement is when somebody is engaged with something, they are more committed towards it. And when we talked about attention, our goal with attention was to make them convert from divided attention to sustained attention. And once they are in the stage of sustained attention, then from there they go on to the engagement stage, and that's when they start they're feeling more committed towards your product. Because it's one of those buy-in kind of things where, you have already paid. Sometimes what happens if you bought something, you feel you end up liking it because you've already invested money in it, and you don't want to dislike it because then you feel that you wasted that money. So it's that kind of a bias. When you have already paid attention to something for a while, it's easier for them to go into the engagement state. And during the engagement, that is when the loyalty starts being built. Now, the neural basis of engagement is closely linked to the threat and reward circuits of the brain. When the reward circuits are activated, what happens is that people's brain kind of light up, and they can actually think more clearly. They feel nicer. So that's always a good thing. It is basically dopamine is released, oxytocin is released, all the feel-good hormones are released, and it creates a sense of bonding. People also feel more creative. Their problem-solving capabilities also increase when they're more engaged with something. So all these factors, they make them feel good about themselves. And what also happens is that they come up with more ideas while they are engaged. So even let's say they are engaged in your book, and they would be feeling that, they start thinking ahead that, oh, what's this character going to do next? How are they going to solve this problem? How are they going to come out of this situation? So once they go into that stage, they are moving towards that addiction thing. So our aim is to basically activate the reward circuits of the brain. And it gives that dopamine boost, and dopamine is always a good neurotransmitter to harness, because once you go into that dopamine cycle, it's a self-fulfilling thing. When you're in that stage, it creates further engagement, and then it releases more dopamine. So then that's when they start loving your book. They start becoming fans. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, there is also neural basis of disengagement, and that's when the threat circuitry is activated. Now, you might think that threat is really to do with live or die situation, which involves things like fear, but it's not only that. Anything which creates that avoidance response, it activates a threat circuits. So when we talked about those ABCs, annoying, boring, and confusing, those are not only attention traps, they also activate our threat circuits. And that's when disengagement starts taking place. So, and when disengagement happens, it actually uses up large energies of our brain. And so you feel horrible about it. And that's when you lose the loyalty. Now, how do we create engagement within it? Because engagement happens after you have already captured their attention. So for engagement to continue, one of the ways to do it is by gamifying your approach. So when somebody comes to your website, we want them to keep moving from one thing to another, and that another thing has to be of an increasing level. They should feel better when they go to the other things. If everything remains at the same level, it doesn't provide, they get bored after some time. So, you know, if you have some little bit of interactive stuff, some people put up quizzes, and those quizzes have to be fun quizzes, or you have a nice picture to put up, you know, if you have got cover art made, or if you've got some art made for your characters, or even landscape within your story. That's why you can put up that picture with a little bit of write-up, which is extra. These kind of small things, it creates extra engagement for the person. Especially for somebody who's writing fantasy and epic fantasy, you can even use maps. Maps are really useful, and readers of fantasy, they love maps. I know I'm a fantasy reader, so I know maps really they immediately trigger dopamine release in my brain. So when you're writing a particular genre, you're also a reader in that, and you know what kind of things get your dopamine going. So think of those things, and you can put them from one place on the website, let them to get to another place, you know, so that they feel they're progressively being engaged. And this is actually not as difficult as it sounds. As writers, we already follow these practices within our books. We are creating things where readers move from one page to another, one scene to the next. So we already know how to create engagement. And now we just have to take those techniques of engagement, that philosophy of engagement from a book, and we can apply the same principle to our website, to our social media as well. Okay, sure. So I'll just say a couple of more things and then open it up for questions. So for an author, your brand is a combination. The way I look at it is your brand. I'm talking about fiction authors, especially because when I look at any literature on branding, most of it is focused on non-fiction. I've found very little which actually pertains to fiction. So one of the things I have noticed when I looked at fiction authors who have done this well is that their brand is an expression. It falls somewhere between their book's voice and their personal author's voice. And when they combine that, they fuse that in a very authentic way. And then they translate it in the language that the target reader which appeals to their target reader's emotion. Then that's when they can instantly bond with that reader. So it is not just your books, because sometimes you might be writing a book which is different from who you are as a person. I mean, we don't all write autobiographical stuff, but every book has some aspect of author's personality in it. And when we combine our own personality, our own voice with that book's voice, it creates that authenticity. A good brand is trust is the core of brand longevity. If you come across as fake while brand building, then the readers can sense it. Authenticity is the root of this trust, because quite often when we see other people doing their marketing and branding, and we feel that there's a lot of messages coming at us from all directions, that people tell us that you should do this, you should do that. As authors, you must have a website, you must have a newsletter, etc., etc. But not everything fits every person's personality. So, even when it comes to social media, some people prefer Facebook, some people prefer Twitter, for some people Instagram is better, Pinterest. So you see what fits into your personality and use that particular thing effectively. You don't have to do everything at the same time. Just find the thing which fits, where you can be authentic. Like for me, I cannot do Twitter. I just cannot. It drives me up the wall. So I've decided not to do it, because if I were to do Twitter, I mean, I'm on Twitter, but I use it mostly as a news source rather than doing any of my promotion. Because when you try to use a method which does not fit your personality or cognitive style, then you end up faking it, and fakeness is something which really puts readers off. So the brand, I think we'll close there. We've talked about most of the important things. I think I'll just open it up for questions.
So, of course I do. Swati, if you write in 2 different genres, would you suggest having a pen name for one of them if they are very different genres?
It depends on how, even if they're different, it depends on whether they're going to be conflicting with each other. Like
if they're conflicting with each other.
Yeah, I mean, if you write children's fiction and erotica, it's definitely better to have names for that. Yeah, but if it's not going to conflict, it doesn't matter. Like for me, nothing I do is conflicting, though they are very different types. So I'm using my name for it. But yeah, if it's conflicting, it's always better. I mean, you don't want your children's book bio to come across erotica, or vice versa. May not be such a problem, but
thank you.
Welcome. I'm sorry, I could not have the slides today. It was such a mess up. But I'll definitely put up the PDF on the When Worlds Collide things.
Yeah, we'll get those up somewhere, probably on our website as well.
Yeah.
I don't quite know how WWC is planning on getting it all together. I know we're putting these recordings on their YouTube channel, but things like the presentations and stuff, I think still needs to be worked out a bit. But I'm sure there'll be a place on their website where they'll start putting the presentations down as PDFs.
Sure. Yeah. Now there's a question by Hassan. How often do you post new material to your website to keep viewers engaged? That's a good question. And actually the answer depends on you as well as your readers. One thing I feel as a consumer of a product is that I don't mind if somebody posts very often or very less frequently, but I like it when they are consistent. I don't want them to bombard me with material every day for a few days and then not hear from them for several months. It's a consistency which really matters, and you can set the expectations right off the bat and decide what's going to be suitable for your time frames and time limit, and then you can go for it. When you set the expectations, they know what to do. Some people also follow another method that they may be posting every day, but they give their readers the option that the readers don't have to hear from them every day. They can hear once a week or once a month, that kind of stuff as well. That is the thing that set the expectations, and then readers won't mind whether it's too often or too less, as long as it's consistent. Now my website, somebody asked for it. Oh, my website is undergoing a makeover, so it won't be really brand appropriate right now, but you can see it. I put up, it's swatiChavda.com, so it's my first and last name.com. I'll talk about my website problems itself. I started it off. I started writing epic fantasy. It's a 9-book series, and I'm still working on. I've done 2 books which I've not yet published. I'm going to publish them in a couple of years because I want to get more books done. So I had started off creating a very epic fantasy feel to my website. And then I realized I wanted to publish those books a bit later. Right now I want to publish my humorous fiction, which is based in hell. And it is completely different. It has a very different feel compared to the epic fantasy stories. So I realized that the previous feel I have created for my website is just not working anymore, and I am actually going to be making it over to make it more compatible with what's going to be selling in near future. And I think brand is always evolving. It's not a static thing, so you can change your brand as your needs change. Sometimes even as you grow, you may move beyond where you were at one point, and then you can do rebranding of your stuff. So it's a living, breathing, static thing, and if you love it, it actually loves you back. Any more questions?
We have about a minute left.
Thanks for everyone for joining and staying in despite this slideshow problem.